welcome along to the Pastor's Heart. It's great you're with us today. Dominic Steele is my name, and today we're talking to an old friend, Raj Gupta.
Watch out who you're calling old, Dominic.
Raj is the senior minister of Toongabbie Anglican Church, but here today with the hat of being consultant for the Centre of Ministry Development here in Sydney. Yeah. And we're thinking about the leadership pipeline. We're taking questions on Facebook. The leadership pipeline, lots of people seem to have been talking about it the last couple of years. Let's just dive right in. Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, great question, Dominic. The idea came out of the secular world in America. Mm-hmm. And it was a company, I think it was General Electric, and they had a problem. Their problem was every time they needed to find people for management leadership positions, they would go and they would find someone externally, they would come in, and over a period of time they just ran out of people. Mm-hmm. And so they were grappling with the problem of, why do we not have leaders? Why do we not have people internally that are ready to do more senior leadership positions?
I can see why a church might be noticing this.
So what they did, they commissioned consultants to go and research this problem. The consultants ended up writing a book actually called The Leadership Pipeline.
I think we can put it up on the screen. Of course, people listening to us in audio, that won't help them. But we've got the cover of that book. Yeah.
So look, these consultants, they came out, they investigated it, they said, the reason you don't have people for more senior leadership positions is because you don't train people, you don't equip people, you don't help people go through this leadership pipeline process. And what they then did, they went about the task of identifying different levels of leadership, and fascinatingly, they were able to identify different characteristics that kick in at different levels. And so they developed 7 levels that they said were generic for most different organisations. And so they wrote this book that dived into these different layers, talked about the different skills. The other insight was this, which was really interesting for us. They said there's no point teaching people how to be ready for the 5th or the 6th layer of leadership when they're at level 1. What you need to do to train people for the 6th level or the 5th level or whatever it is, it's actually critical when they go into that new layer of leadership.
To teach them at that point.
To teach them at that point. That's when they have maximum motivation to learn. That's when they're grappling with the problems, the issues they're facing. That's when they need to be equipped with new skills.
Now, when I was reading this book, I found it a little bit difficult to translate massive General Electrics into my little church.
Yeah.
That's why I've asked you to come here and help me do that translation.
So, look, over the last decade or so, there have been a variety of people in Christian ministry around the world that have taken this concept and have started to apply it to the ministry world. And if I could just illustrate the point from the General Electric world for a moment, it's as simple as this. You have a factory line, you're building washing machines, and you have different people on that line who are all contributing to that product, and you have a supervisor. When that supervisor leaves, your default is to find
the most gifted factory worker.
The most gifted factory worker, and you put them up into that position. Now, what happens is, without training, so their default is they're supervising this factory line of machines being built. A problem happens here. Their default is to go and fix the problem. Something's broken down and they think to themselves, oh yeah, when I was doing that job, this always happened. They just go and they fix it. The line keeps going. But what they don't do is help that person and equip that person to resolve the problem themselves. Now, there's a myriad of implications of that. This person ends up feeling disempowered. They don't buy in, they don't own what they're doing. And there's a bottleneck that's created over here. And other people feel neglected, and you can just imagine how that rolls out.
And we do that in the church.
We certainly do.
Give me the parallel illustration in the church. There's 1,000 of them.
There's 1,000 of them. The one that pops into my head, leading a growth group.
Well,
Many churches these days, especially medium, larger ones, they're trying to develop clusters or groups, categories of growth groups, demographically based in some way. And so what happens, and look, I even find this myself, I have to be really careful when I go and join a group now, because I go and join a group for a night, and in my head, my intention is to be there and support the group, to get to know the leader, to give them feedback, etc., etc. Invariably, people look to me. And if I answer the question, if I talk about other things, that has the same impact on the growth group leader. I need to go along with a whole different mindset. My role in being there is not to say a word other than to build up this leader. There's one of many examples.
You stay quiet for an hour and 45 minutes, and then you give a little 2-minute talk about what a great guy the leader is, or what do you do?
I always make sure that I give a great talk about how good the leader is.
Yep.
It's a bit artificial to sit there for an hour and a half and do nothing. So you have to say some things, but things that are reinforcing what the leader's saying.
Right.
I will only go off on something if I'm invited by the leader to do so.
Right. Okay. So you've been researching the whole subject of why churches don't grow beyond the 200 kind of marker.
Yeah.
And so we would have a lot of pastors, a lot of senior pastors listening to us, watching us now, but also even more lay members of churches and assistant ministers and youth leaders listening and engaging with us now who are part of those churches under that 200 mark. How do we apply this principle to that size church?
The leadership pipeline principle?
Yeah, the leadership pipeline principle.
Well, look, if we...
Because I've got it on... I mean, somebody came to me on Sunday and they said, when's the ESL class start this afternoon? Or somebody says, where's the whiteboard? Or, I mean, these are the things that happen. You said the guy shouldn't fix the thing in the factory line. What should I do when I get that question?
Yeah, well...
that's the issue,
well,
isn't it?
That's an example of it. It's far bigger, but pick that example.
Yeah.
My advice is to try to say to the person that approaches you, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Which was actually true.
With you, Dominic, that would often be the answer, I'm sure. You know, John is the person who's in charge.
Yeah.
Would you like me to introduce you to John? So you're building him up in that process, and you're also saying, I am not the go-to person for everything that happens across this church. So that's one of many examples.
Okay, so you talked about 7 levels of leadership. I'm figuring in a church of 200, we're not talking 7 levels of leadership, but how many levels are we talking?
Look, the answer to that varies. In fact, I think we have a diagram.
Yeah, you've got. We'll put it up.
That we can flick to. I don't think it matters so much how many levels of leadership we're talking about. I think different sized churches will have different answers to that question. Because if you're in a large...
let's just think... there's 100 and... I mean, you've said in the Sydney Anglican Church that we've not... Only 4 or so churches have cracked that 200 barrier. So that means there's a whole stack just under that 200 barrier who just are chomping at the bit, wanting to do that. We've got the diagram there. So tell me, how does that church of 180, how does it apply, 160, how does it apply to them?
Yeah. So that's a really critical size, that 160, 180 mark. Because it's around about that size that the relational dynamics have to change. And so that diagram is illustrating those kind of sharp curves that people go through. And whoever is leading those churches, you need to be conscious about going through those curves. Now, I'm going to come back to your question, but let me talk about those curves.
Yeah.
Because people often think that leadership development, it happens as a linear process.
Yeah.
You start off with a church of 100, and when you're at 200, you're doing the same thing.
Only bigger.
Bigger, faster, with more vigour, etc., etc. The leadership pipeline diagram that is up on the screen, it's saying no. In fact, we're seeing all of those issues as ministers and pastors with burning out and mental health issues and a whole stack of things. Running harder and faster is not the answer. The leadership pipeline is helping us to understand you actually have to work differently. And that's what those sharp curves are all about.
Okay, so first I'm going from leading self,
Yep.
then up to leading others. What's my first? Take me on the first spin around the curve. But we're moving from somebody on the sound desk to what?
Okay. Well, can I introduce just 3 categories to think of this in?
Yeah.
And the book talks about this. So,
So do you reckon every minister of a church of 180 ought to be reading that book?
there's no harm in reading it. It's very detailed. I think there's an appendix at the back, or I've developed an appendix that summarises the points. But I think what's even more powerful, Dominic, are these 3 categories of framework which I'm about to give.
Yeah, I won't interrupt again. Actually, I can't tell you that I've interrupted again.
I've known you for a long time. So 3 words: values, skills, and time. Mm-hmm. That's the framework. At each of these different levels, what you value has to change. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the skills that you need are different. Mm-hmm. Therefore, how you use your time has to change from what it was. Mm-hmm. So many hours. So there's the basic framework. So you take your example. So now let me answer your question. The person on the sound desk, they value, or should value...
No feedback. If our sound desk operators are listening, the mic being on when I start to speak.
Yes, and the mic being, changed when someone else gets up with a different mic. And there's a whole lot of technical things that they value.
Yep, the kind of tone and bass things, and no echoing. And yeah.
Now, the person who's their supervisor, so we're moving now from leading self to leading others, they have to value different things. Their temptation is when they're sitting in the congregation and they hear that the level's not right, or the mic's not on, or their temptation is to go in and fix it.
Yep.
The leadership pipeline framework teaches us actually, no, now your primary value is the development of the person on the desk.
Right.
In their skills and their understanding and their... and so it might be short-term gain to get it all working now, but actually your long-term gain is to see that person develop. So your value shifts. You need skills to do that you previously haven't had. You need skills in knowing how to delegate. The Centre for Ministry Development has a course that can be done on that. You need skills now on encouraging someone who is in that role. You need skills on giving feedback. I mean giving verbal feedback, not in the sound desk sense of the word. And we could go on.
Yep.
How you use your time, so 3rd category, values, skills, and now time. How you use your time, therefore, has to change.
Yep.
Now, the kind of thing you might do is make sure after church, on each day, you're the supervisor, you want to sit down with whoever it is for 10 minutes, and you want to encourage them for 8 minutes. And then maybe just, here's one pointer for something to do better next time. Now, you can apply that to a whole bunch of different areas. Running growth groups is one of the examples we give in the courses we run. Running a staff team. As a lead pastor, a senior minister, rector, whatever your preferred title is, exactly the same thing. If you have multiple staff, you have to develop in the area of leading staff, managing staff, developing staff. I'm continually astounded to hear, as are my colleagues at CMD, how many church staff teams don't have regular meetings. And the list goes on.
So, if I've got, well, let's go over to kids and youth ministry.
Yep.
So I've got a kids and youth leader, teacher.
Yep.
They're in a tiny team with 2 or 3 who are leading one particular class, but there's one person responsible for leading those 2 or 3.
Yep.
So they're the second rung of the second. They've been round. That person's been round the curve once. Is that right? They're thinking about the other people in their little team.
Yeah. Look, that may be the case. Sorry, I want to just pull you up on that because I'm
trying to build the team.
Yeah. No, I understand that. It's important not to get too caught up on exactly where someone is on the thing. The situations and circumstances vary, the size of the teams vary, etc., etc. So, but it's the framework: values, skills, time. Now, you keep going on the youth or children's one, and there comes a point in time that someone who is doing the week in, week out teaching or running the activity, they're now like the supervisor, the person who's promoted from the production line to the supervisor. And so they need to start to value things in addition to the teaching of the kids, which is the development of the leader.
Yep.
And so it's exactly the same as what I was just talking about, the sound desk person. All of those issues kick in. Giving feedback, helping that person develop as a leader, grow as a leader. The particular details are different. We're now not talking about pressing buttons on a sound desk. We're talking about teaching kids. But the skills you actually need to do that are very, very similar.
Now, I'm just thinking about time taken to develop people. In our church, in the inner city of Sydney, we have worked it out that the average congregation members stay with us is 4.1 years, do you know? And so we've got to see them go from non-Christian or fuzzy Christian to serving, to taking responsibility to lead. And just by the time that they're starting to become competent, they've moved to your church in Western Sydney.
The centre of Sydney, thank you very much. So come to the centre of Sydney.
Here, they've got to come up and buy
Yeah.
And so that's a hard job to do that development in that 4-year period. Yeah.
Well, you need to remember people will come to you with all kinds of different skills already. People are not, and those skills are in biblical language, they're gifts that God has given. A lot of people, particularly people in management, will already have some of these skills.
Yeah.
And sometimes to do those high level things, you actually don't need to know the technical details.
Right. Yeah.
People find this challenging and a bit controversial actually, but one can encourage someone. You pick the sound dish, you pick the. It may well be the case that the person to do that role is not the person who is a high performer when it comes to the basic ministry task.
Right. Give me an example of that. Yeah, I suppose it could be the person coordinating the music doesn't necessarily need to be the best guitarist.
Yeah, that's a good example. One that we use in our training is the person who is a leader of growth group leaders. They don't necessarily need the same degree of exegetical skills in understanding the Bible that a growth group leader has. But they do need skills of the encouragement of the leader, the coaching of the leader, very important. But a lot of people can do that, not just ministers.
Now, just take me on the journey of you working this out, thinking about this Dunbar's number, and then how you've changed your practice at Toongabbie Anglican Church.
Sure.
Because you've actually pushed through this. Yeah.
Well, we're trying, under God. We haven't talked about Dunbar's number, I think, in this session, but Dunbar's number is one of the things. So my Doctor of Ministry thesis was on growing churches beyond 200. Dunbar is a guy who actually was researching monkeys. And he made this discovery, hence Dunbar's number, about humans. And he mapped it to the size of a human brain, the capacity of a human brain. And he said, look, the most number of reciprocal relationships that a typical human being can sustain is about 150.
A typical human being or a leader human being?
A typical human being. So the US military, they have developed their whole sizing of their different divisions around this 150 number.
Yeah. I guess that's why you have centurions, they do 100.
And so you build up, things from there. What that means for leaders is, so coming back now to Leadership Pipeline, in order to push above that, at a human level, above that number, now I'm not talking extraordinary people that have, huge capacities for knowing the name of 1,000 people.
How does mere mortals like you and me? Yeah.
That's right. I mean, everyone else might be different, but for us, Dominic, you have to work differently. This is completely consistent with the Leadership Pipeline. You have to step up. You have to focus on your leaders or your staff team. So for me, your question at Toongabbie, it has involved grief. because
We're starting to get onto the pastor's heart at
yeah,
this point.
yeah. Well, look, it's connected, and the title of this podcast is The Pastor's Heart. It involves grief because I just take myself. I've gone into ministry because I love people and I love Jesus. I get to a point where I started to notice these barriers. I started to notice my own capacities, and just recently it's all come up again. And I get overwhelmed with the number of people. And I realise, for the sake of a gospel, where the Lord has placed me, I have to focus on certain areas. I have to step up through what I now understand to be the leadership pipeline. I have to embrace certain things, like leading and managing a staff team, which means I have to spend considerable amounts of time with staff. We in CMD talk about 30% of my time, 40% of my time, even 50% sometimes being spent on staff. But there are
I feel like that's me. Do you know? I feel like I spend the whole first part of the week, apart from this half-hour conversation, thinking about relating with my staff and coaching and encouraging and one-on-one meetings with them. And then the last part of my week, I'm thinking about teaching the Bible for Sunday.
Yeah. Well, different people will manage the mix differently, but even with that, Dominic, you take that, and it's not dissimilar to my own journey. There are other things that I love doing with people that I've had to stop, or that pains me to stop. So for me, I remember one day I turned up to staff meeting. We have a missions pastor on staff, and I looked at him and I said, "Mate, I need to apologise." He said, "What for?" I said, "Well, I was meeting with such and such who were new to church. They told me their story of how they came to church, internet, God working. It's an incredible story, actually. They've now come to Christ. And I'm just sitting there in my lounge room, and I just couldn't help myself. I offered to do Christianity Explored with them." Sorry, I know I should have talked about introducing God, but that's a topic for another day.
Yeah. My admiration for Rico just went up and up and up when I spoke to him at GAFCON, and we've been friends for a decade, and it's an excellent course, Christianity Explored.
Okay, let me get going.
I just wrote another one.
So there in my lounge, he's the missions pastor, my other staff member.
Yeah.
He's the guy who does Christianity Explored.
Yeah.
And yet there I am with these people in my lounge room. I love them. I want to see them come to know Jesus. Guys, I've got this course I can, and they said yes like that.
Yeah.
Now, my grief is I love doing that.
Yeah.
I love spending time with people. I love visiting new people to church. And yet, in order for me to step up through this leadership pipeline and rise up to the responsibility that the Lord's entrusted to me where I am, there are things like that I have to not do myself. Because they're going to take my time. So when it come back now, value, skills, time, those things are going to take my time and prevent me doing some of the other things.
Something like wedding preparation, marriage preparation, for example. Yeah. Would you put that in something you want to sort of get somebody that you as the senior pastor deploy to somebody else, or?
Well, that's the principle I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So you have to delegate, which then means you have to coach. You can't just ask someone to do it and leave them with it. You
got to coach
you have to
somebody
coach
else,
because you're helping them step up through this leadership pipeline.
Right.
But the other thing that we have to do is there's a whole bunch of things, and this has been my journey for over 10 years as a pastor, in the lead role at Toongabbie Anglican, which is a great privilege and great church for anyone who's watching and looking for a church in the centre of Sydney, as I call it. But I've had to go out and develop new skills.
What sort of skills?
For me, the big stereo staff. The world has come a long way from the days of staff of friends who walk alongside each other.
Yeah.
There's a whole that can work well sometimes and has worked well sometimes, but there's just an example. For me, over 10 years at Toongabbie, that's been my greatest area of development myself. It is an example of going and getting training, researching, reading, doing all kinds of things to learn how to do that. There's a myriad of things. Change management. I made huge mistakes in change management. I had to go and research it, which meant I had to invest time. which meant I couldn't do something else. So there's a process of grief
Now
in letting go of things.
You talked a moment ago about you realising you'd made a mistake in offering to do that course, but where have you found the congregation have been unhappy with you as you've withdrawn from doing things?
How long do you have?
Well, Raj and I were at dinner on Friday night, and we were with a member of your congregation, and he was organising a men's breakfast, and you weren't going, and he was gently ribbing you about it.
And you did it on Sunday as well.
Right. In church? Or just privately? Yeah.
Privately, over morning tea, but
Right.
it actually led to a very fruitful discussion. But look, put that aside.
But that's, the people do grieve. That you can't go to everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
you can't do everything.
and you can't do everything, and you don't know everything. And that's okay. You know, I can't visit everyone. There's ministry models have changed over the years. There's a chaplain style of minister that has been a pretty traditional Anglican model. But look,
that pushing through that barrier seems so difficult for
It is.
so many people.
when you've cracked it, Dominic, write a book and let me know. It is excruciating because and I love doing some of those things, but I just know in my head I can't. So I recently I update my parish council on these matters from time to time, and I remember recently I worked out we have this many people at church, 450 people at church, and this and that, and I listed out all 10 issues. And I just said, guys, I'm just feeling overwhelmed. I can't do it all. And it led to a really fruitful discussion. So sharing the burden, being open about that, not bearing it yourself, is one thing I try to do. I certainly wouldn't say I've made it by any means. And as a church, we're still pushing through some of those issues.
Right.
Yeah. But I can see the framework.
Yeah.
And that is the leadership pipeline. That diagram before it had 4 levels. There's other levels you could add into that. And each level stepping up means I have to acquire new skills.
Now, if I'm going to put a couple of links onto this page on the Pastor's Heart website for people to read and think more, what should those links be?
Yeah, good question. One link would be the book that you showed a moment ago. I mean, that's coming from a secular perspective. It needs some adaptation.
Very helpful to read, yeah.
But very helpful in giving you the framework that then needs to be adapted into a Christian environment.
And would you suggest me reading it and then getting my team members to read it, my key team members to read it?
Look, you could do that. I think once you've read it, you get the diagram and you can engage in it. We've just been talking for half an hour and hopefully it's been helpful. You understand you can't just keep going harder and faster doing what you always, you have to work differently.
Yeah.
And mapping that then out into values, skills and time.
Yeah.
I think, that took 1 minute. You can talk about that. You can get people to be honest about their grief in letting go of things or recognising what they should. And then you can talk proactively about what skills do you need. It's not too difficult to get your head around the framework. Sometimes we find people get really caught up on the details of which level am I at, and there's different grids around and things. But I think the framework is far more powerful.
Thank you very much for coming to talk to us.
Pleasure.
Yeah. My guest on the Pastor's Heart today has been Raj Gupta, and of course Raj is he's a consultant with the Centre for Ministry Development and the Senior Minister of Toongabbie Anglican Church. You've been listening to the Pastor's Heart, and we'll look forward to catching up with you next week.